Hello and welcome to a new episode of Quickies with Angela and Katie.
I'm Angela Dawn. I am a tantric sex coach and I help couples get closer.
And I'm Katie Wilkinson of Katie Coaches. I'm a sex, love, and relationship coach, and I can help you bring more pleasure to your partnership by bringing more pleasure to yourself. For today's episode, we invited our colleague Melanie Bonk to talk with us about sex after you have kids. Not the sex that made those kids, but the sex that you're having together as a couple after you've brought kids into your family.
Yeah, Melanie and I first met on a coaches retreat. So just imagine 100 sex coaches on retreat together. It was really incredible and intense and a blast. And that was in Costa Rica a couple years ago. And recently I was chatting with Melanie about family dynamics and sex. And I thought this would be a great thing to discuss on Quickies.
Absolutely. Melanie is a certified somatic sexuality, love, and relationship coach who creates safe, transformative spaces. Melanie has dedicated her practice to teaching couples the tools they need for a lifetime of bliss, harmony, fun, and of course, the most epic mind-bending sex possible. It's literally in her name. She'll help you bonk better. We love a good pun here, and we're very excited to hear from you, Melanie. Welcome to Quickies.
Hi, thank you so much. It is an honor to be here.
So, to start things off, can you tell our listeners more about your background and your focus area as a coach?
Yeah, I would love to. My childhood was pulled apart by divorce. So, with a really, really young age, I had a consciousness of the things I wanted in partnership and the things I didn't, and
Mhm.
especially the kind of partnership I wanted if I was to ever bring children into this world. So, I think before I even had the language of conscious partnership and conscious relationship, my husband and I started diving into that realm 25 years ago when we first came together. And now we have four beautiful kids. We're in the teenage years, so we've kind of got to that point. I see the light at the end of the tunnel. And so I infuse all of my lived experiences with my training in tantra, in love, sex, and relationships, in somatic healing, in a very trauma-informed container full of safety and really love and joy and bliss, because this is exciting work that we do, and it's such an honor. So I think that infusing that bliss into this work is beautiful.
Hmm. I loved hearing, Melanie, how you talked about that you were getting into, kind of conscious relationship with your husband before you even really knew what that meant, right? It's
Yeah.
so great that you were able to carry that, from the beginning in your marriage. And I'm right there with you, in terms of light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, I already am in the light at the end of the tunnel because both of my kids are out of the house and being adulting as far as, what an early 20-year-old can do, but they are adulting. So there is light at the end of the tunnel, and doing that work to just carry the relationship through the years of childbearing is so important, because then you get to the other side and so many people get there and think, what have I done? Right. But
Mhm.
if you've kept it going the whole time, it's a totally different dynamic.
Yeah, it's a blast.
And I
Mhm.
love your emphasis on bringing bliss back into the marital relationship, the marital sexual relationship. Like people they can treat sex as something that's so heavy, and it
Mhm.
just bring the fun back, bring the lightness back, bring the play back.
Mhm.
Yes. Hmm.
So today we'd like to talk about intimacy when kids are at home. Now, I'm not a parent myself, but kids or other family living with you can obviously put a damper on bedroom activities since there's a risk of being heard by someone else nearby, or, there's more demands on your time, your attention, your energy in general. So I took a look at some data from a 2023 survey that Angela found of more than 24,000 women, which suggested that about 45% of parents with kids under age 4 are having sex just once or twice a month. But as children grow to ages 5 and above, parents tend to start having sex more often, like maybe 1 to 2 times per week. And I'm curious if that tracks with what you know to be true as a parent or what you've seen from your clients, Melanie.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's such a trap that we get into in society, where the minute we think about becoming parents or we're going to bring kids into the environment, pleasure, zest, excitement just goes right down the toilet. So I think really creating a mindset shift with what actually parenting is. I find that when I became a parent and some of my friends and clients, it's really the most erotically charged time in our life because erotic energy is really aliveness. It's fueled by creativity. It's this like quality of high vibe energy that feeds our vibrancy and our vitality. And when we're coming down to it, that's what being a parent is. It's such a creative expansion of who you are. And you're in this like problem solving environment all the time. So if you kind of shift that mindset to this is going to be a blissful experience as opposed to, oh, here we go. Now we're going to become like, the color is going to fade. It's going to become black and white. We're going to lose all the beauty, to really expanding into what it is that you want to create. There's a choice you can make with that environment, but there's some choices that we can't make. So as women, our brains change more quickly during pregnancy and post-pregnancy than any other time in our life. And there's actually an area of the brain where empathy grows as you bond with the baby. So obviously we have no choices in those physiological responses to becoming a parent. However, we can really become conscious of that. So understanding that this happens, understanding that, oh, my brain right now is in overdrive and I'm not exactly wanting to rip my clothes off and hop in the bedroom, and then giving yourself the compassion and grace and showing up for yourself. Our brains are on overdrive with all this energy and creativity. And sometimes it's really hard for us to dip into the selfishness that's required for sexual play.
Mm.
Oh, I love that. That's so beautiful. And I love the mentioning selfishness like in a very wholesome way because it is for the
Hmm.
benefit of the relationship. This isn't I'm taking, this is we are building together. We are
Yeah.
choosing to infuse this kind of creativity.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, birth is a creative process, right? Like
Literally.
literally, right? Like
Mhm.
growing a human in your body is creating someone, right? So you really can't pull these things apart.
Mhm.
Sexuality, creativity, the process of making new humans, it's really all connected, right? It's all going into that like sacral chakra creativity. And birth can be such an ecstatic experience. And I actually was working with a client couple just about a week or so ago, and I was talking with the wife about now she was, a little bit an older woman, more in my age range, and I was having her remember what it was like to go through natural childbirth. And I'm like, yeah, guess what? That's where you want to be in sexual surrender too. That way that you had to totally surrender to what your body wanted and needed in the moment. The best sex is coming from that same place. And that kind of blows people's minds because most people aren't in this like tantric construction of sex, like maybe we are. But yeah, and I remember when I was going through having my kids, and I took a wonderful birth training. And I remember the teacher talking about this idea of 9 months in, 9 months out. Right. So, like, you're building the human internally for 9 months, and then you're spending at least 9 months really in it in terms of nursing and caring for the child. And a lot of people would say the next 2 years. Right. And so a lot of women find that their creative energy is zapped during those first 9 months, those first 2 years after birthing, but it's natural, right? Like you're putting your creative energy into something else, right? And it can take a little bit of time before that balance shifts and you get back to prioritizing intimacy and you have a little bit more in time and energy to do so. The trick is like not falling into that trap of just stopping, because that's what I see a lot with the women that I work with and the couples that I work with. It's like kids came and they couldn't shift from the creativity of child rearing back into sexuality. And so Yeah. Well, Katie, you've got the next question is gonna really go right into that, right? But like, how do you do that?
Exactly. Melanie, where should couples begin if they don't know where to start?
Yeah. So I think the first step is just to realize how slow it should go.
Mm.
Slow, slow, and even slower. And that can really look like the first step is actually just communicating the pleasure that you want to experience. And at the beginning, especially after we have babies, I remember I was more scared to be with my husband at that moment, the very first time after having our first baby, than I was I think any other sexual experience because my body was so foreign to me. So as a woman, and I didn't have this awareness at that time, but as a woman, I would give myself pleasure first. So I would connect and attune to this new landscape of my body because it's totally changed. It's not the same body. So meeting yourself, getting familiar with this new body, the new skin, the new stretch marks, the new scars, creating the honor that comes with that because so often again we can get stuck in another trap where it's like, well, I had a baby, now I'm expected to bounce back and be better than I was before and my body is going to look totally different. Oh no, this is a beautiful natural state that our bodies are going through. And so I think taking that moment to really honor the process and honor where you're at. And then when it comes to adding things back in with your partner, like I said, slow, 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 creating conscious conversation around the pleasure that you want to experience and the boundaries. So maybe your first time together is just slow kissing and you talk about the fact that I'm not ready for anything that's below the neck. Right now that feels like a different body than I
Yeah.
that I don't have access to. So maybe our first time together is just slow making out and everything from the neck up and we'll just see and have more conversation after that. So it's keep coming back to communication. Communication is the lubrication in our relationships. So we have to communicate about it first.
Yes, absolutely. I wrote an article for Brains Magazine a few months back, talking about how to cultivate intimacy in your relationship. And in one of my articles, I go into this idea of incremental intimacy. So I don't know if I made that up or not. I like to think I made up the idea of incremental intimacy, like I coined it. I think we mentioned it in a podcast, maybe a couple of years ago, even Katie. But it's this idea that you don't go from A to Z, right? You start with A, and like Melanie's saying, maybe you're just kissing for 3 minutes and that's where you start, right? Maybe you're just snuggling on the couch while you watch TV and that's where you start. Maybe you're just holding hands with your one free hand while you're pushing the stroller and that's how you start, and then what is the next step that makes sense, right? Maybe the next thing is sleeping without your PJs on, or maybe the next thing is um having dinner by yourselves, and getting your next door neighbor to watch the baby for 90 minutes so you can do that, right? So thinking about what is the next logical step, what are you comfortable with, trying it out, and then thinking, oh, yes, that worked. No, that didn't work, going back if you need to. And yes, if it worked, what would the next step be? And like you said, Melanie, the lubrication of conversation, like being transparent with each other about what you think the next step is and coming to an agreement on what you're going to try next. And really just taking those incremental steps. So I'll find that article in Brains and put it in the show notes so people can take a look at that. And I'm also developing a bingo game around incremental intimacy. So if
Yes.
that's finished by the time the show airs, it'll be in the links too.
I love that. And, I think I'm a mom of four. So let me just go ahead and say this right now. Scheduling sex does not equal boring sex. Schedule the sex, schedule the time to
Absolutely.
communicate. The minute you schedule it, you're starting to build that erotic energy and you're
Mm.
charging up your body. So Just get over the fact that, oh, scheduled sex means that it's like Wednesdays and it's only missionary and it's so boring. Let that go.
Oh no, hardly, hardly. I mean, my kids are out of the house and I might not schedule like individual sex sessions, but I schedule sexy weekends with my partner. And
Mhm.
we're like, "Ooh, when is our next, bed in? When is our next sexy weekend?" Because we really look forward to it and talk about anticipation, right? So
Mhm.
stop looking at scheduled sex like it's a bad thing.
And that anticipation can be so key. Like it's an element of positive psychology or the psychology of what makes people happy is, for example, when you're traveling, when you schedule it ahead of time, you have all of that time to look forward to the experience. So why wouldn't you want to extend that to your sexual life as well? You know what's coming. You know how good it's going to be. You know it's the time for both of you to get to enjoy each other. Why not start the savoring way in advance? It's a much more pussy-friendly approach to sex too.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So let's get into some misconceptions around intimacy versus sex. I know these are terms that sometimes are used interchangeably, but for example, the survey that I mentioned earlier in this episode, perhaps they could have meant intercourse specifically when they said sex in their questions, and that could have influenced how people responded. If some people counted making out and other forms of foreplay as sex, while maybe other people were only thinking of sex in terms of penetration, like vaginal or anal penetration. Whereas we as coaches know that sex and physical intimacy, those are both far, far broader than just this phallocentric PIV type of sex. It's so much wider than that. So I'm curious, when intercourse isn't available for any number of reasons, Melanie, what alternate activities do you like to suggest to couples to keep things spicy?
Love this question. I really recommend, and I recommend this for all couples, no matter if sex is on the table or not. But mutual masturbation is like this supercharged tool that you can use to become a better lover because you can witness the strokes, the pressure, the touch that your partner really likes best. Because when it comes down to it, ourselves, we are our greatest lover. So you can really attune to what they're doing, how they're pleasuring themselves. You can increase it because this is such a vulnerable act, self-pleasuring in front of each other, that it increases intimacy, increases connection, increases that openness between you. You can also get the pleasure that you want because you're giving yourself the pleasure. And it opens up the gateway to expressing what you desire. So it's a great opportunity to bring in more open communication. You can be pleasuring yourself and you could open up the dialogue to say that, oh, I desire for us to try this or bring in this tool, or while I'm touching myself here, I'm fantasizing about you licking me here. So it's an
Mhm.
awesome opener for communicating your further desires and fantasies. And I that can become really vulnerable. You have to kind of be at a certain place to be wide open and pleasuring yourself in front of someone. So even the first step might be looking at the pleasure practice that you have right now. So are you in a conscious pleasure practice with yourself? Do you talk about masturbation, self-pleasuring with your partner? Those are kind of like the building blocks to even get to that mutual masturbation point. So
Mm.
it comes back to self-pleasure, self-pleasure. You, like I mentioned, you are your greatest lover. So really tapping into that first.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that a lot of women that I encounter don't have any kind of pleasure practice, right?
Mhm.
And,
Right.
if they are getting themselves off, it's probably something that's really quick. They're probably using a vibrator, um,
Mhm.
and just trying to get people into the idea. And, men are the same way when they're jerking off. It's not necessarily a pleasure practice. It's like a relief of anxiety or their stress for the day or because it got turned on, a reactionary kind of thing, So very few people are exploring their pleasure in a sacred context. And that is just a great place to start.
Absolutely. So the idea that we want for parents to keep things spicy, keep things passionate, keep this intimate connection alive between the two of them. This is so important, isn't it? Parents have this powerful opportunity to model positive relationships for their children. And we know that children grow up to base their future adult partnerships off of what they saw at home growing up, what was familiar to them as their concepts of the world were first developing. So, a child who sees a great, loving, healthy relationship between parents is more likely to seek and create a loving, healthy relationship when they're an adult.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that like I mentioned before, that we have a choice. So I saw and I was conscious of what I didn't want as a young girl. And so I knew that certain things were non-negotiable. Play, passion, pleasure, those were all things that were a must in my relationship. And I had to put the effort, we put the effort in. If something was off, if there was a wound that kept coming up or a trigger that kept coming up, it was really our cosmic invitation to dive deeper into the realms of who we are in the sacred relationship. And so modeling that for my kids has been huge. So yes, they can walk into the kitchen and find us making out. That happens.
Yeah.
Now I'm in the realm of experiencing the opposite, where I walk into the kitchen and my oldest is making out with his partner and I'm like, "Oh wow." And there's like that yin yang where it's like, "Oh, I'm so excited that they're open and expressing their sexuality with respect, with safety, with compassion, with love." And then there's the mom part that's like, "Oh, that's so disgusting. That's my baby doing that."
Yeah, I mean, that modeling piece is just so important. And, I think a lot of us, really grow up with like the yuck idea of our parents having sex, right? I mean, but I think that comes from not seeing your parents expressing that kind of desire for each other. I think there's something to that. But this also extends into talking to your kids about intimacy, right? And I know, Melanie, you do work around raising sexually empowered kids, right? So tell us about
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's what you just mentioned reminded me of a story that happened recently where I talk so openly about, oh, I call him my husband, my boyfriend sometimes. Oh, my boyfriend's coming back today. He was gone for 4 days. This was last week. And my youngest goes, "Oh, I better charge up my headphones." And I go, "Yeah, you better." So he knows that night he's going to have to put those noise canceling headphones on because mom and dad are going to be making noise. They're in a romantic, passionate relationship. So really being transparent about that. I mean, we're not, ripping off each other's clothes in front of the kids, but they know what's happening behind closed doors. And I think that that's so important for them to see and hear and witness what respect, what consent, what love, what passion actually looks like, because they're not going to get it from media. They're not going to get it from movies. They're 1000% not going to get it from porn. So being so open and honest and having these conversations with our children, I think is one of our greatest acts that we can do as parents. And that translates all the way down to conversations about self-pleasuring. I'm teaching my kids to have that sacred relationship with their body that, Angela, you mentioned so many of us don't, or so many of us have to learn. Just imagine if we all learn that from day one. And so that's the empowerment that I am giving my kids, to understand that they are the only ones that can love themselves absolutely unconditionally. And I'm teaching them that when they're self-pleasuring, at least once a week, look at yourself in the mirror, give yourself that love, understand that all the things that society talks about, like maybe one of the kids is really breaking out acne wise. And I say, look at yourself in the mirror, see that, hear the criticism, hear the thoughts, and then come back to what's real. What's real? Oh, I'm going through a hormonal shift. Therefore, it's creating and creating that consciousness within them is, I think, going to change the vibration of the planet if we all did that.
Oh,
Mhm.
that is so wholesome. And it removes so much of the shame that they're going to be getting
Mhm.
from everywhere else about their bodies, their sexuality, their expressions of themselves. I'm obsessed.
Ah.
Yeah, I mean, wow. Like, how lucky are they that they have a parent guiding them? My kids are older than yours, Melanie. So, mine weren't getting some of this until they were much, much older. And, one of my children, like, definitely relies on me, like, as their free love and intimacy coach.
Yes.
now. And, that is a lucky child. That is a lucky adult child because most people don't have that kind of relationship with their parents. And kudos to you for getting that going at such
Thank
a
you.
young age with your kids.
Yeah. And it's, if you're listening to this podcast and you're like, well, I haven't done any of these things, it's never too late. Always
No,
start and creating the conversation. And, it does. It, like you said, Angela, it brings and creates these verbiage and conversations that aren't foreign. So when your kid does get into a relationship, they can come to you and they're like, oh, what do I do now? What do I happening? And then I think one of the biggest acts we can do is be a celebratory person for them. So the first time my son came and had a serious girlfriend, I'm like, did you guys kiss? Oh my gosh, did you kiss? Yeah, we kissed. Ah! I celebrated with him every step of the way. Did you touch a boob? And I would ask those questions. I would ask those questions, A, to understand where he's at. So I'm empowered. I can give him the correct information and I can
Mhm.
cheer with him and be with him. And that way, when things get hard or heavy or things get more serious, he's got that
Yeah.
relationship and those roots are solid.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if we don't talk to our kids about it, they're certainly not going to talk to us about it.
Mm-mm.
That's such a powerful ripple effect to put out into the world.
Yes.
I'm curious if you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners before we wrap things up, Melanie.
Oh, I think just meeting yourself where you're at. So if you're listening to this pod and you're excited and nervous about the things that we're saying, just be there for yourself and honor that curiosity and give yourself so much love and compassion because this is hard stuff that we're not taught how to do. And so these kind of podcasts are like an amazing lifeline. And like I said, we can all begin to make that ripple effect. So juicy.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everything that we've talked about, I love that you said meet yourself where you are, Melanie, because that's incremental intimacy. That's, learning to develop your own pleasure practice. That's beginning to talk with your kids openly about sex. That's beginning to talk with your partner openly about sex. Most people are off masturbating in other rooms and have no idea what each other is doing. So just find that spot where you can start with whatever idea you heard here today and take it slow, but move it forward. Yeah.
Mm.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And I would even extend this to say it's not just to parents. This is
Yeah.
advice for all couples,
Everybody.
all lovers. These are fantastic places to start and to restart if you've noticed that slowing in your own relationship for any reason. It doesn't have to just be from kids, but these are such fantastic lessons. So thank you, Melanie, so much for your time here today and for sharing all of your tips with us. Where can our
Yes.
listeners go to find out more about your work?
You can reach out and learn more about my coaching at www.melaniebonk.com. You can also, there's a freebie site or a freebie page on the site where any person, anybody can download individual practices to begin some of that sacred sexuality, some of that meeting yourself with love. And I also have a pop-up pod. So if you'd like to start experiencing some somatic practices, you can go to melaниebonk.com/pod and you enter your email. And for 3 weeks, you'll get one somatic experience in a row. So it's a great way to dip into your body, connect with your breath, with your movement, with your mindfulness. So you can dive in there and then follow me on Instagram at Bonk Better. I say words like pussy and orgasm, so I'm shadow banned. So please follow me.
Struggle is real.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Melanie, for being with us today.
Yes, thank you.
And that's all for this episode of Quickies with Angela and Caity. Thank you for listening, and you can follow us on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube.
And if you'd like more great information on sex, love, and relationships, be sure to follow us on social media. I'm Authentic Heart Coaching on Instagram and AuthenticHeartCoach.com on the web.
And you can find me on CaityCoaches.com or on Instagram at CaityCoaches.
And if you're not having enough sex, whether it's because kids are at home or not, definitely check out my 3-minute intimacy triage PDF. You'll see the download in the show notes. Check it out. You'll find some solid ideas about how to remedy your particular situation. And on the other hand, if you are having enough sex and you want to take it up a notch, I have a brand new workshop I'm offering in Annapolis the first Sunday in November. It is called Full Body O. That's right. I couldn't say full body orgasm on Instagram. So my class is called Full Body O. And it is open to couples and to individual women. And the women will be paired up for communication and breathwork exercises. I'm really excited to offer a class for singles and individuals that way. If you're interested in private work with your partner rather than coming to a workshop, let's have a conversation about how I can help you to light a fire and transform your intimacy. I also have a weekend retreat for couples coming up in May, which could be the perfect way to get away from the kiddos and really invest in your relationship.
We also have a free training all about how to have more mindful and connected sex that feels amazing if you have a vulva. Check that out in the show notes. And of course, if you're ready to go even deeper into your sexual practice with guidance designed for her pleasure specifically, check out our signature on-demand masterclass series, Pussy Whispering. And with that said, we'll see you next time on Quickies with Angela and Caity.